Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Schroder. I'm a social worker, and my background in terms of the social work field has been approximately 23 years. Various positions held, but most recently, and my kind of my the area that I like to focus on is mental health, and I've been a mental health therapist with AHS for 11 years. I'm recently contracting on my own, so I'm no longer affiliated with AHS. I thought I should mention that. Today's presentation is managing stress during the pandemic. And it's a short webinar. There will be a chance for question and answers. So feel free to pose your questions, and my colleague David will gather those up, and I will answer those near the end of the presentation. I've got some great information that I've tagged onto the slides at the end, some links. So if you're viewing this through Facebook or online, you should be able to just click on those links and go in and have a look at the videos, as well as some PDF documents that I've included. So this is coming from the Treaty 8 Urban Office in Edmonton, and as I said, my background is social work. I've got a BSW and a Master's in Social Work in progress, and just on the tail end of that with writing up my thesis. And we'll just go into the next slide. And the slide after that is Treaty 8, the objectives for this particular webinar are learning to recognize signs that you are experiencing stress. That's really important. A lot of times people kind of ignore those symptoms, but let's really try to pay attention to those. If you're wanting to manage and cope through stress during the pandemic, let's really pay attention to those signs. I will give those signs and symptoms as we progress along with the webinar. The next objective is recognizing the circumstances that trigger stress reactions in you. Now, that's an interesting area as well, because as individuals, our triggers are unique to us. Although there are some common triggers as well for most people, there still are, like, I guess I should explain that a little bit. The triggers will be as unique as you are as an individual. And as I go through that particular area, you'll see what I mean by that. And the third objective, of course, is applying stress management technique to help you cope and manage with stress. And then lastly, with the presentation are the links for resources and supports. And we'll just go into some background information around what I've been noticing with COVID, the pandemic. It certainly has become front and center for most of us as we try to gain some control and hope of return to our everyday lives. Being front and center has been really easy for us because of the news that you turn on your TV and they're running nonstop throughout the day, which is an interesting area that I will talk about later on. Although we are sort of reopening and going into phase 1 of trying to get back to some normalcy, there's still, stress attached to this. Fears of increasing numbers, that are infected with COVID. Of course, that becomes a worrisome thought that most of us have. And thoughts and changes to how our everyday lives without a doubt, have increased our stress. So There's lots of worrisome attached to COVID, and as I said, there's unique triggers for each of us. If we're worriers, we tend to have more triggers. If we're laid back, and stress is not something that pops up regularly. I think that it has for COVID. Most of us can say that it's been a difficult time and our stress has increased because of the fact that it is a pandemic and we're quite worried about what the outcomes are for each of us and our loved ones. So today's topic, as I said, is managing that stress during the pandemic. And I'm going to go into the next slide as we work through objective 1. Stress is something that we all experience. Learning how to cope with its effects is something that we should learn. Studies do show that it is helpful for us if we want to improve our physical and psychological well-being through managing stress, that it does improve those 2 areas, physically and psychologically. Those who don't learn the healthy strategies for managing stress often will turn to negative tools for coping and managing. By that, some of those negative ways may be gambling, using alcohol or drugs to sort of numb off from the stress or get away from the stress. Those are just to name a few. And for some that have a comorbid diagnosis within mental health, sometimes it even leads to self-harm. So it's really important for us, I think, and I'm sure that each and every one of us out there believe that we should be trying to find ways to cope and manage with our stress. And this is a paramount time for us to really grab hold and get involved in learning about stress management. So webinars such as this and other forms of learning about stress, absolutely. I think this is an important time to use those tools to improve your functioning. I wanted to say that stress can also lead to, as I said earlier, the physical symptoms. So some of those somatoform symptoms could be such things as aching in your body, various places, stomach upset. That's a very common one, especially in our teens. I found that working with individuals that seemed to be a very common symptom of stress for teens, was that tummy ache or that pain in the stomach. And especially if a youth was being bullied in school, the stress of that and time to go to school, they would have stomach aches. That was very, very common. And then of course the psychological nature in with respect to stress. And the next slide. Triggers of stress. I think just bear with me as I get through this webinar. The nice thing about teaching on a webinar is that it's not coached. There's no big banners that we watch to help us present our information. And so it's a little bit more laid back, and I like that. I like doing presentations live as well, like in front of a group of people, because that interaction with the audience is also helpful. And I'm a pretty laid back person, and so when I say just bear with me, I'm just trying to figure out some of these slides that are coming up on my end and on my colleagues' end. So there's a little bit of information there. I thought it was cute to add that. I tend to stress out about stress before there's even real stress to stress about. It stresses me out. So that was cute. And that's, I would say would be somebody like with a type A, so they're, or somebody that is, have a history of being a worrier. They tend to stress out about being stressed. And like what comes to mind for me is an individual that I've known for a long time, and every time I see her, and I love her dearly. She says, "Oh, I'm so stressed. I'm stressed for having stress." So this little tidbit here that I have on this slide seemed to hit home with me, and I thought I would share that as funny. Stress is not funny. I will back up there, and I just wanted to make light of some of this too, because the pandemic has really created a dark cloud over most of us. And so when we think about how we cope and manage, it's important to include humor in there as well, especially as Cree people. We're a very funny group of people, and we like to joke around and we like to have funnies. And so I think those are natural ways of managing stress, is to include that humor on a daily basis if you can. Stress is something that we all experience, and getting back to the presentation, learning how to cope with its effects is something that we should learn. So stress is both a psychological and physiological response to change. It does not manifest itself in the same way with everyone. For example, some people do not eat enough when they are stressed, so they tend to just not be hungry, their appetite goes down, while others may binge eat. So you've heard of comfort food or comfort eating. So that tends to be one example of people that, one of the negative ways of managing stress is to over or under eat. Some people will develop insomnia during times of stress, while other people will sleep excessively. When your ordinary behaviors and responses to change are significant as a result of life circumstances, such as the pandemic that we're currently in, chances are that you are experiencing stress. So a key point that I want to make there is when your ordinary behaviors change significantly as a result of some life circumstance, chances are you are experiencing stress. David, next slide. So I think we'll go back one slide. Sorry, David, these are not lining up. I'm not sure what's going on. So I'm just going to go with so what I have on the screen currently right now reads, can be physical symptoms and can be psychological in nature. Nope, that's way too far ahead. Right there. Perfect. All right. So some of those symptoms that an individual might find for, I'm going to use myself as an example with the current stress that I'm having about the slides, is that your heart rate will go up a little bit. So a pounding heart, especially if it's ongoing stress, your heart rate will increase. You might develop some shaking, inability to make decisions, or an inability to take action. Your focus on what you're doing might be not quite the optimum. You kind of go to a room and you go, I went to get something and I can't remember what that was. So that's one example of a lack of focus, or you're trying to work through, especially for students or people trying to work from home, there might be a lack of focus on your studies or the current work that you're doing. So that is another symptom of stress. Hyperactivity is another one. And as I said, appetite changes and sleep pattern changes. And then I also mentioned the somatoform signs or symptoms, such as aches throughout your body, various places of your body. As I mentioned earlier, with teens, and for young children as well, that tummy ache thing that goes on. And even for adults, sometimes with stress, your intestines and your whole functioning becomes kind of muddled, and so you could have varying degrees of problems in that area, such as diarrhea or constipation. Those are some other physiological symptoms. And then for those people that have a lot of stress on their plate, sometimes it gets overwhelming and they could end up having panic attacks. So it's that's on the extreme end. So it's really important, I think, to get a handle of stress. I tend to laugh when I'm under a lot of stress. So I kind of giggled there when we were trying to figure out the slides. And so that's my response to stress. And it's kind of cool that, I would go through a little bit of a stress moment there during this presentation. And I guess what I want to say is that no person is exempt or immune to stress. We all have some form of stress at some point to varying degrees. Now, this particular stress that I was role modeling there, that is something short-term and can be addressed, and we move on. And as I said, I like to use humor a lot, and I love being around people that are humorous. So those people are people that I draw to or I might even pull up slides or memes on that are funny to sort of get my focus back into relaxing a bit, especially if I've had a really busy day and I'm trying to wind down that stress and come off so that I can relax. I might engage in something that is humorous, by reading jokes or maybe even viewing videos. Don Broomstick is one that comes to mind, and there's some others out there in our Indigenous communities that are quite funny. So as we go on, those are the signs of stress, and we'll go on to the next slide. And that one we can skip over. Stress management techniques. Actually, I want to back up again because there are some points that I wanted to make with the triggers. Our stress triggers can be common, and I said that, and unique for each of us. But some of those major life changes. So when you're thinking about change, some of those may be major life changes, such as a marriage. Even you think of marriage as being a happy occasion, right? And it's hearts and flowers and everything that comes with marriage. But people that are going to be marrying each other, and those around them tend to carry a lot of stress. And that's one of the most common um, changes in someone's life that may trigger an episode of increased stress. The other one would be divorce, the opposite, of course. Relational troubles, so problems with partners or other people, like it could be work related, it could be problems, you know, within the family with loved ones. Another major life change that brings about stress is childbirth, and of course, death of a loved one. Um, so those are some major life changes. The other ones that I can speak to that increase stress is relocation. So moving from one community to another, like that's scary a lot of times because you're going into a community where you may only know one or two people. And the big one right now for, you know, I'm going to put it out there, is for most people during the pandemic that, you know, we haven't been able to work at our jobs regularly, for those of us that have been able to continue with some work, and for some others that had to just stay home, like they've shut the doors to their workplaces. It's brought a lot of financial pressures to most people in our nations, as well as throughout Canada and probably throughout the United States. You know, that's been a huge stress for a lot of people. The other example of a trigger for stress increase would be job changes. And then, of course, natural and man-made disasters. And we've had a few of those within Alberta over the last, you know, in 2011 and 2015 for Fort McMurray and Slave Lake was 2011. So those are disasters, flooding in various areas of Alberta as well. When you think of those disasters, and of course, COVID-19, that is something that's beyond our control. It shifts in our, it's made shifts in our overall daily routine that are not necessarily our choice. So adjusting to the new normal or adjusting to staying home, although we're going into that phase one of reopening now, you know, when I think back to the initial isolation, that was a huge shift and change for a lot of us. And it did increase a lot of our stress and anxiety in terms of what is this disorder or disease? Like, what does it mean for me and my loved ones? So absolutely, it's brought on a lot of stress. And as we move into phase one, though we're going to try to reopen our society, going into phase one, there's still some reservations for a lot of us. We're thinking, okay, what does this mean? And we're all sort of waiting for the shoe to drop because, you know, we're wondering, are our numbers going to go back up again? And that's a scary, scary vision that most of us are probably carrying, although we're not trying to carry it too far. We're trying to be optimistic. There are some people that, you know, that suffer from, that are worriers, that that's front and center for them. So absolutely, it's important to name that stress and find ways of coping and managing with the stress. And on the next slide, what's going on with me here? It might be my end that's not. Okay, stress management techniques. So again, when I think about stress management techniques and we think about the triggers, as I said, they're as unique as each of us as individuals. And that's true for some of the strategies for coping and managing. And in my work with individuals within the mental health field, finding ways that would work for an individual were front and center for me as a professional. And so I have a vast amount of tools that I tend to pull out after I've gained some sense of what does this person gravitate towards and what are their interests, because some of the techniques that I'm going to name might be like, no, that's not for me. And for other people, it's like, yes, I want to do that. So there are literally many ways to manage your stress. One of which I mentioned earlier is distraction tools. So redirecting your thoughts and getting involved in something else. So shifting and moving out of the stressor thoughts, such as my example of winding down in the evening. So my day might be hectic or whatever, and it was kind of a stressful day. And so at the end of the day, of course, I want to just relax. And so I need to give my brain time to relax. And in order to do that, I need to engage in something that is soothing or, for me, funny, because it's a process for me. I like to engage in stuff that are funny, so reading memes or reading jokes or, you know, viewing videos. And then I move on to, you know, viewing maybe some TV, but not too much of it before bed, because that's a no-no. But the big one for me, winding down at the end of the night to help with sleep, is meditations. And that has worked phenomenal for me in terms of bringing some relaxation into my life. And that might work for me, but it may not work for somebody else. So I'm going to give you a lot of different ideas. Number one would be relaxation techniques, such as I just said, meditation, deep breathing, visualization activities. And that's pretty close to the meditations, because sometimes those all three are incorporated in a meditation. So deep breathing, visualization, and the other one is self-hypnosis, that often kind of goes hand in hand with that particular relaxation strategy. The other technique for would be aromatherapy. You know, so certain scents, you know, we're drawn to that. So for my teenage granddaughter, she likes to put on a nice scent in her diffuser, and that helps her to wind down in the evening. The other one is massage therapy. So if you can get somebody to give you a massage, that's great. I know in our nations there are people that have, you know, taken the courses for massage therapy. So when I say that, I know that it's available in our First Nations communities. Maybe not all, but for some communities, definitely that's an option there. Number two would be our exercise. So aerobic activities, running, swimming, Zumba class, which is dancing, and then such things as walking, stretching, and yoga. Yoga, I think, to me, that's, well, it's an anaerobic activity, but it also comes under relaxation. So, but it can also be quite strenuous too when you think of the various types of yoga. So, you know, engage in something that is, that gets your blood, you know, your heart rate up there. And then potentially, if you really want to rest and relax at the end of the evening, gentle stretches. Some of those yoga stretches are phenomenal for sort of bringing down that stress that you've encountered throughout the day. The other area that I would say that you should pay attention to is nutrition, eating a balanced diet. You know, for people that are stressed, sometimes like they'll overeat or undereat. So if you're one of those people, you know, really factor this particular area in and try to make that a goal of eating a balanced diet. Stay hydrated with plenty of water and try to avoid processed foods and reduce your caffeine consumption. That's the other one that I wanted to speak about. A lot of people will reach for caffeine products such as coffee, especially when you're working in offices. I don't know what it is about coffee, but a lot of people tend to, you know, want a cup of coffee. And I would say try to reduce the amount of consumption that you have during the day for two reasons. One, it's going to interfere with your sleep. So if you have problems sleeping, that's definitely one that you want to minimize and perhaps try to get down to 1 cup of coffee, and maybe that's in the morning. Avoid alcohol intake. Alcohol does not improve your coping and managing with stress. In fact, it does the opposite of that. So avoiding alcohol is another area that will help you to improve your coping and managing during a stressful period of time, such as COVID-19. And maybe take appropriate nutritional supplements. So for some people that need that additional supplement, you know, talk to a pharmacist, ask what would be helpful when you're struggling with stress management or you're struggling with anxiety, and they will help you pick out the best supplement that is for your age and for what you're currently experiencing. And number 4 would be sufficient rest, getting plenty of sleep, maybe perhaps taking a few short breaks throughout the day. And that allows for your mind to rest periodically in the day and decrease the amount of stress hormones that our body creates when we're under a phenomenal amount of stress. The other area would be when we think about COVID and what it's done to our routines. Initially, it's created a huge stressor, like how do we manage our kids at home, and a lot of them are being homeschooled. The majority of the kids in Alberta are being homeschooled right now, and so that's been left to parents. And you know, most of the parents have not gone to university to be a teacher, so this is a brand new learning curve for them, and it's created a lot of stress for a lot of people. I talk to a lot of young parents, and they say, "Oh my God, this is like, how do we incorporate this into our daily routine?" And so when I think about stress management, of course, you know, having a routine is the ideal. So trying to get as much of a routine going at home is important during this pandemic. And you know, you might consider creating an individual daily schedule, which includes maintaining regular times for waking up, going to bed. I call those sleep hygienes, having a really good sleep hygiene, maintaining regular meals, meal planning, and getting ready for your day. Include activities that keep you mentally and physically active, and those that bring you joy as well. So having laughter in your lives is really, really important. I tend to, we've been able to do that co-bubble, like within our family. I've been able to stay connected with my grandson, who does not live in my home, but because we all isolated the same, we're able to now have visitations with him. And if you want to laugh, this little guy, he'll get you laughing. He is hilarious. And so he brings a lot of humor into our lives, and he brings a lot of joy, as well as my granddaughter who lives with me. And of recently, well, actually, it was a couple of granddaughters that were living with us. The one has recently gone back to live with her parents. So again, they bring a lot of joy and a lot of happiness, and I think most of us cookums can relate to this. That, you know, a lot of joy comes from our families. And the next slide. Here are, as I said, there's many, 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 many ways of managing stress. So I've included this particular slide, 38 ways to relieve stress in less than 10 minutes. And a lot of it is about redirecting your thoughts. So redirecting the worrisome thoughts or the stressors, the triggers that are currently causing an increased amount of stress within you. So listening to your favorite music, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll read out a couple of them. Going for a nature walk. I think as First Nations people, it's so important for us to be connected to our land and being on the land. And for many of us, we feel better when we go out on the land, when we're having, I don't know, a fire, and we're having tea around the fire, and maybe your grandchildren are there and you're roasting wieners or marshmallows. It's peaceful. You know, you got fire, you got nature, you got family. Those 3 or 4 areas right there is enough to bring down your stress levels, and it's done in a healthy manner. So go out for a walk, go and do something on the land. For males, right now, they're still hunting ducks. I mean, the best ducks are in the spring. So hunting might be something that reduces your stress, or just getting out in the wild and checking out the trap line. If you have a trap line, going out to the trap line, spending a day there or a night there, whatever, you know, works for you. And during the pandemic, we've got a lot of time on our hands. We're allowed to get out and about with walks and so forth. And for me, going to an isolated cabin on the trap line would be an ideal thing to do to bring down stress. So when I think about redirecting our thoughts, you want to engage in something that takes you away from thinking about the stressor. So away from thoughts about pandemic, having those worrisome thoughts. So getting out on the land, going and taking I guess we can't do that right now, but you can definitely engage in some exercise with your family. So maybe going for a bike ride together, doing some jumping jacks. Another real big source of stress reduction is our pets. So spending time with our fur babies, that might be one that's helpful for a lot of people. And then, of course, watching something funny on YouTube, or sitting in the sun. If it's been a really, really stressful day, maybe you want to punch a pillow to bring some of that frustration out and get it out of your system, and then engage in something that's soothing and relaxing. Maybe taking a shower, or reading your favorite book, or engaging in a meditation. So those are 38 ways to relieve stress, and most of those are redirection of thoughts, redirecting your worrisome thoughts and your stressors, your triggers, to something that is more soothing and more positive. And on the next slide, I thought I would include a little bit of a funny there. Stress, anger, panic, worry. These are emotions that make you more likely to get the flu and coronavirus. Now, I'm going to back it up here. So when our bodies are under an enormous amount of stress, our immune system tends to go down. So when you think about you functioning, let's say in the previous world before the pandemic, and you think about when you were under a phenomenal amount of stress, and think about those life circumstances that I mentioned earlier, those a marriage, divorce, death of a loved one. When you think about those significant changes, I think most of you would agree with me that you tend to feel lagged down, and if you're going to get a cold, it would be after after you've been you've experienced a change. So the initial change, I guess, when I think about divorce, like initially when you're talking about separation and talking about divorce, so that stress, you tend to break down your immune system, and you're going to catch flus, you're going to catch colds. And so when I say that it's connected to flu and coronavirus, I'm thinking in a way that our body's immune systems have been broken down because of too much stress. So this slide says stress management is good medicine. And absolutely it is. It's imperative that we engage in something that is helpful in managing our stress. The one thing that I wanted to also talk about, earlier I talked about worrisome thoughts, and I want to just tag on to that during a disaster or a pandemic, those worrisome thoughts are very normal. So don't beat yourself up about them. In fact, they are quite normal, and they are there to help you sort of navigate when we think about the fight, flight, or freeze scenario. When we're under stress, that tends to come into play, and so our bodies create those stress hormones. And so it's really important to recognize, hey, I'm under some stress now at this present time because of this change and the fears around the pandemic, and I really need to improve my functioning. And so that means improving my coping and managing of stress, and doing it in a healthy way. So being self-aware, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, and also recognizing the pandemic has created an abnormal situation. So we're responding in a normal way to an abnormal event. So something that we have no control over, and it's front and center with us. So be gentle with yourselves, but also be self-aware that you are under some stress, and this is the time to learn about stress management and engage in some of those strategies around coping and managing. One of the other big areas with the COVID-19 has been the phenomenal amount of media news reports. And initially, like we were all glued to our TVs, probably listening to these news reports. But after a while, and as a professional, I certainly recognize that I needed to turn that off. I needed to set some boundaries on how much news I was consuming. Like, so I would encourage most of you out there probably have felt that as well. And so you probably naturally sort of turn the news reports off. And I would say limit those news reports to 1 to 2 times daily, or go to a reliable website for updates, such as the WHO. And I've got that particular link attached at the end of the slide, so you can click on that and just explore their website and their updates. But do so with the idea that you're going in for a short amount of time to view those websites, and you're not going to be consumed by them. So decrease the amount of time that you're exploring and going to websites for news updates or for watching the news. I want you to think about only going on to using the TV for news reports 1 to 2 times a day, and for those websites, because we can get in there and pretty soon an hour, 2 hours. You don't want that. You're really increasing your amount of stress if you're engaging in that for too long. So limit the time and limit the number of times that you go into a site or watch a particular news station. So I want you to set boundaries around how you're viewing the information around the COVID-19. And the next slide brings us to links. Actually, the next slides bring us to links and websites that are reliable and trustworthy. There are some links there for grounding techniques and some for meditation, and some for maintaining routine, which is one of the ones that I strongly encourage during a pandemic or stressful times, and how to be a good quarantine partner. So stress management, we're all confined to home, or we have been. We're now sort of opening up in phase 1, and I think, like most people, they're being careful about how much time they're spending outside the home. So it's really important to be a good partner. And so this link, I think, is a great one to kind of explore at your leisure. As I said, when you're getting into the news reports or the updates, that's where I would like you to try to limit the time on your computers for accessing news information, information around managing stress. Go ahead and view those slides. I've got some information around grounding techniques, and I believe I've also included one on meditation. So there's thousands of meditations out there. All you have to do is go to YouTube and do a search and do meditation, and depending on what you like, do some searches. I tend to gravitate to meditation in the evening, at night, just before I go to sleep. So some of those meditations that will help with sleep are the ones that I tend to kind of want to open up and listen to. And then if I do some grounding during the day, of course, those are shorter meditations, or 5 to 10 minutes. Breathing exercises. When you think about reducing your stress, well, you want to push out those stress hormones, and the best way, one of the best ways, there's a couple of ways, but I'll talk about both actually. One is using your breathing as a form of stress reduction. So go in, search on breathing. I might have even included that on this particular presentation. And if not, I think what I'm going to do is collect all of the information that I've provided thus far to Trudy 8 in terms of links and support sites for individuals, and I'll send that off to Trudy 8 and I'll get them to post it on their Facebook page. And so they'll be in there. And one of them, and I'm sure that I've included information on breathing. The other one that I wanted to talk about too, and really include, was when we're under an enormous amount of stress and we have anxiety that starts to peak, it's the fastest way to get that out is by using your larger muscles. It flushes those stress hormones out of your system very quickly when you use the large muscles. So, you know, running. When I think about using large muscles, I'm thinking about, you know, your legs, using those large muscles. Maybe lifting weights because you're using large muscles to lift those weights. So those are really good ideas in terms of wanting to bring down stress that's really intense in the moment. Go for a run. I've told a lot of my clients, when they get heightened by anxiety and stress, the first thing that they should do is some breathing for 2 or 3 minutes, and then do some stretching and get out there and run if you're able to. If you're not able to run, if there's a reason why you can't engage in running, engaging in something else. So maybe you're using freehand weights sitting. Maybe that's one way. I'm going like this because I'm thinking about those little weights that all of us cookums like to use. So using those as a form of using those large muscles to decrease those stress hormones and bring down your stress levels. And as I wrap up this particular webinar, I'm going to say that we will post links in the Facebook. And if you have any questions, absolutely present them now. And if not, if you want to go in and have a view of this particular webinar at your leisure again, and you have questions, you can always pose them on that particular Facebook page, Trudy 8 Urban Office, and they will forward questions to me, which I will then respond to directly by telephoning you if that's something that works for you. If you want me to respond via an email to you or a text, I can do it that way, but you will have to include that information in your questions that you're posing when you send them to the Trudy 8 Urban Office. And on that note, I'm going to say all the best to you and your family. Please take care while you're out there and about. Ensure that you're doing that physical distancing, social distancing, and try to minimize being out there and being exposed to lots and lots of people. I think that's the most important thing that we can do, is we limit our contact with others. And if you're wanting to expand your bubble, meaning your family, household, quarantine, I'm sure everybody has been doing that quarantine. What we've done is we've self-isolated for 14 days, and then my grandson, they've done the self-isolation as well. And then now we've got the 2 bubbles where we can interact with him. And it was really important that we did that because of his health complications. And when I think about supporting one another, being kind to one another, I think about all of us really taking care of one another and being aware that maybe our immune systems are great, but the person that we're in contact with out there, their immune system is not great. So really, I guess the message is there. Try to limit your outings and be careful out there. Keep that physical distancing going. I think that's going to be the new normal for us as a society. And if we want to keep our families safe, our loved ones safe, then this is something that we have to ensure that we're doing every single day while we're out there. On that note, I will say blessings to you and your family, and take care.